Hi, this is Mark again, and this is the third video in our series about European Inter-Parties Patent Review, otherwise known as opposition before the European Patent Office. So, a patent has been granted. In the last video we mentioned about the signals you might perceive before grant, suggesting there might be an opposition, and the things as a proprietor you really need to keep a lookout for in tidying up the application before grant. Now then, the patent's been granted and we've now got a time of 9 months between the date it's been granted and the last date on which an opposition can be filed. So, if you're a proprietor, there's not really much more to do in this stage except sit down and wait to see if an application for opposition is filed. However, if you're the opponent, this is a key time. You now know the scope of the application as it's been granted, and you now need to work out whether you've got some prior art to fire against it. However, there's a more important point in many cases beyond the prior art. The question is, are there any formality objections which can be laid against the application? So there are a number of these. They're summarised in Article 100 of the European Patent Convention. And the first one, which I'll pass over briefly because it doesn't tend to often have strong effect, and that is whether there is sufficiency of disclosure. In other words, has the patent been clearly and sufficiently disclosed such that it could be carried out by the skilled person? Because if it hasn't, you could assert in an opposition proceedings that in actual fact, whilst there might even be an interesting invention there, it cannot be properly carried out by the skilled person. So the signals you might be looking for here are an unduly broad claim. So the claim might cover embodiments, they might cover features which are not really properly disclosed in the invention, or they might be too vaguely disclosed. Now we need to be careful here because vagueness isn't a ground of opposition itself. However, there are issues like, for example, if you had a definition, say a polymer, a plastic, and it had a molecular weight, unless the definition of how that molecular weight is measured and it's very clear is present, you could argue a lack of sufficiency of disclosure. You might have a particle size of a material. A particle size, well, how is that measured? And especially if you have a particle which is, say, smaller than the wavelength of light, there may be a lot of ambiguity depending on how a material is measured. You may have, say, an alloy composition, and that alloy composition may not add up to 100%, it may add up to 101%. Well, that's a clear example where you can go after such formality objections. So what you've got here is an opportunity to take the knowledge of your technical support, of the inventors, of the technical people at the proprietor, and they will be able to give you some signals as to whether there's enough information here to attack on the formality of ground of sufficiency of disclosure. So this is the end of the third video, and the next one I'm going to also looking at preparing the opposition